Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Meet Me at the Spot. I'm your host, Holly, and this week I am so excited to share my amazing conversation with Lacey Bond, aka Intimacy Lacey. Lacey is a PleasurePsych Certified Sex, Relationship, and Intimacy coach based in Los Angeles. She's dedicated to helping people heal from purity culture and unravel unhealthy narratives around sexuality. She lived the quintessential purity culture experience, raised in Evangelical Christianity, attending youth group, Bible study, and Christian school, and she graduated from Biola University in 2011 and was featured in the 2015 documentary Give Me Sex, Jesus. She offers post-purity group healing programs as well as one-on-one coaching for individuals and couples to help people connect with their authentic self and empower personal and relational growth. So excited to talk with Lacey because she explores a different part of sexual health and sexuality around kink and purity culture and all of that great stuff. So it was really fun to get to pick her brain and learn a little bit more about the world that she is all about. So let's go ahead and jump in with my conversation with Lacey. Welcome, Lacey, to the podcast. I am so excited to have you here.
Me too. I'm so excited that you invited me. I have no idea what is in store for me, and anticipation's killing me.
Yes, I love it.
Maybe a little death though, so it's okay.
Yeah, no, it's gonna be fine. It's gonna be fine. So for the listeners, if you could share a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you're all about.
Yeah. So, hi, my name is Lacey Bond. I'm a certified sex and relationship coach, which means mostly that I help people talk about sex and think about sex. There are hands-on somatic body workers. That's not an area I'm specialized in at the moment, but my whole mission is to help people heal from purity culture and kind of examine and unravel, deconstruct, to use an evangelical term, unhealthy narratives around our bodies, our sexuality, so that we can, I'm trying to not use too much jargon, but live fully fully embuttered lives. That's gonna, hold on, I have to rewrite the mission statement on my website now, Unbuttered Lives. Yeah, so I'm a post-purity sex coach, basically. Also a post-purity kinkster, both as a practitioner and I do a bit of education around it as well. I think that's the most succinct way of talking about what I do. I do coaching, one-on-one group work, and I'm also developing a couple of classes that I'm really excited about right now.
Yay, how exciting. First of all, this is so cool. The majority of guests who come on my podcast have some sort of experience being involved with religion in some way. And so this is going to be a really great conversation for all the listeners. So the first question I want to ask that I like to ask all my guests is, what got you started and interested in this work?
I actually got connected with this work via a sex therapist that I knew and had worked with, and I was in kind of a career transition point where I used to work a very corporate Fortune 100 big boss lady energy. I was not a big boss. I was a sales operations manager. Which I really liked, but I actually became disabled from being able to sustainably do that job. Hi, my name is Lacey, and I have chronic hand pain. Kind of hard to maintain a computer type based career when that happens to you, but that's neither here nor there. Basically, this therapist was like, hey, like I know that you're going through this transition. You might want to consider this program that our clinic has started, which is called PleasurePsych, that's oriented to train sex coaches and therapists and provide continuing education or education for entering into the sex education, sex coaching, and sex therapy realm. I'm happy to delineate the differences between coaching and therapy because I'm always clear that therapists have a completely different, very robust licensing set of requirements, and there's a lot of nuts and bolts between the two, but that's kind of what got me into that transition. But even prior to that, like I did my final project at Biola University, yes, that Biola, on how sex negativity in the church was bad for women. I did pass the class. I did get an A. They didn't kick me out for it because I was still writing from a very Christian perspective at the time. But like I've had kind of a streak of like interest in sexuality and a pushback against the crushing weight of purity culture that discourages that from a younger age. And then I was provided with an opportunity that enabled me to go into that professionally, which I don't want to sound really cliche and be like, I'm really grateful that I became disabled. I'm grateful that the circumstances that I was in life and the privileges that I had, like a corporate long-term disability insurance policy, so that I didn't go broke, let me make that kind of transition for myself.
Yeah, I know it's always weird saying like thanks to this thing that happened. Yeah. Uh, so first of all, that's a wild story, and I love that so much. What a jump in all sorts of ways. I would love if you would share a little bit for the listeners, like the differences between like sex coaching and like being like a sex psychologist and all of these different realms, because there's a lot of these terms thrown around and sometimes people think they're the same and they're kind of getting the same thing, but they are different. And if you want to talk about a little about that, that would be amazing.
Yeah, totally. I actually have a section on my website about this because as someone who really values therapy and the therapeutic frameworks and therapeutic professionals, I want to be very clear about what different roles can do. So I have a FAQ on my website, which is basically, is a sex coach a sex therapist? And the answer to that is generally no. Sex therapists can also be coaches. They will it just is a slightly different service offering that you can do if you happen to do both things. There's similar purviews, like the goal is to help people, and both coaches and therapists try to create a non-judgmental space for clients or patients to grow and explore. But we're not the same. Coaching can be kind of similar to talk therapy if that's something you've done, but we have different scopes, and I kind of break it down by licensure, location, and flexibility. So coaches might be certified when it comes to licensure. Like I went through the PleasurePsych program. There's also the Somatica Institute, and there's a number of certifying bodies and programs of varying levels and types of education. So a coach might be certified, while licensed clinicians and therapists have to obtain a higher degree in psychotherapy, theology, social work, medicine, like to become a doctor, as well as licensing through state boards. Therapy is a space where clients can explore deeper traumas or diagnoses that coaches aren't trained to handle. So as a coach, I don't hesitate to refer someone who wants to do work around sexuality themselves, but who has like a different set of presenting issues, is the therapeutic term for it, than I, as a coach, am equipped to handle. And I'm a big proponent of therapy in general. Then location wise, because of that licensure, coaches can work with anyone anywhere, regardless of location. Whereas if you're a licensed clinician, you can generally only practice in a certain area where you are licensed, which is good. And I think that's awesome and for the best. And then flexibility wise, like there are some services that coaches can offer that therapists can't. For example, like accompanying or guiding a client to exploring, like get comfortable with an adult. Or like I could take a client on a field trip if someone was like, I am trying to explore my body and learn and get comfortable with things. I want to go shop for a toy, but like I'm scared to go into a sex shop, which is very common and very valid. As a coach, you could basically do a field trip or accompany someone somewhere that you wouldn't be able to as a therapist, or if there was an activity that was anywhere near that, it would have to fit within a specific therapeutic framework. And let me see, it's kind of the main thing. And then the other big difference is that insurance often take insurance. A lot of times therapists actually don't take insurance anymore, depending on what it is for. But coaches, unless they are practicing as a licensed clinician, cannot accept insurance. But I will say that, I mean, for a lot of sex therapists, they often don't take insurance anymore, which is not just a therapy thing, that's a healthcare industry thing. Just fewer practitioners are taking insurance because it has become more of a hindrance than a help in a lot of cases. But that's a different TED Talk. We were here to talk about sex.
Yeah, no, I love it. That's really cool to know the difference between the two, because in this work, and I'm sure you have a very similar experience with your social media following, have a whole smattering of people who are in the sex education, sex therapy, sex coaching, sex enjoying sphere. And so I think it's always good to know the differences between the two, and when you're going to pay for services that you know the difference between them, you know what you're able to get from this person. But that, coaches especially are mindful. And I love that you said this, like, if it's out of my scope and out of what I can do, I will refer them to someone else who has different qualifications to
Mhm.
handle that situation. So I think that's awesome. I love that.
It's part of informed consent,
Yeah.
which the other big difference is that with coaching, there is also no governing body of ethics. And that's something to consider when you are considering hiring someone to tell you how to live your life or advise. I don't consider coaching telling someone to be how to live your life. I would consider it a vehicle through which to provide guidance, support, ideas, and frameworks, input on how to live your life. But that is another big difference. But even like, though I'm not governed by a board of ethics, like my personal ethical framework includes informed consent, which means knowing what the fuck is going to happen to you, what can happen, what you're in for, what's not. Usually, informed consent comes up with like medical procedures, but I think it's valuable for everything because I'm also very big into consent for obvious reasons.
If you're not big into consent, red flag everywhere. Red flags. Yeah, I used to teach high schoolers and then I also worked as like a community sex educator. So going into schools and being the fun person who did fun presentations. And I had a kid try to argue with me, literally argue with me about consent. And he was like, well, like, what if they're not like enthusiastic about it? I'm like, I'm gonna stop you right there, and I want you to think about this in your head. Do you actually want to have sex with someone who is not like all about it? Like, why?
Where the fuck is your head at, kid? I can't say that
Right.
in a school, but like, bro,
In my head, I'm like, the fuck? I'm like,
did Andrew Tate
what?
send you?
Yeah, right. What question is this? But I'm trying to handle it in a way that's like, I'm being professional, I'm being nice, but also like, hello, everybody hear this?
Think about the
Don't.
mindset that your question's coming from. I
Yeah.
picked up a really good little booklet on consent. I'll have to try and find the name of it. I was at Ripped Bodice, which is a romance store in LA.
Yeah.
And they had a whole section on sexual health and wellness, which is what I was there for. And I was like, oh, look, books for me. Huzzah. I mean, I also love romance, don't get me wrong, but I'm more of like an archive of our own, like erotic fanfic girly, because that was my sexual awakening in like 2005. I read a Legolas, Aragorn, Hurt, Comfort, like adult fic when I was 14. I was like, what just happened to me?
I love that like everyone has that moment where they're like, ooh,
Mm,
okay, it's different.
right?
Um, I
Completely lost track of what question you had just asked.
No, you're totally fine. I don't think I'd ask one. It's fine. It's gonna be great. I'm gonna listen to this back and I'm like,
Oh, it was the
I
consent
know
booklet.
consent. Yeah, we're
Consent,
talking
yeah.
about consent.
There's a little pamphlet, maybe like 50 pages of like graphic novel format, just kind of illustrating all the nuances and stuff. And like on the topic of consent, I was actually at Kink Fest a couple of weeks ago, and there was a workshop on a very specific kink, consensual non-consent, because consent is one of the three underpinnings of the kink framework. Agency and autonomy, communication and consent, and negotiation are kind of how I describe the baseline. But for consensual non-consent, understanding what consent means on a really nuanced level and informed consent, especially being part of that, was really important. And this was like a 90-minute long seminar, which like the first 30 minutes of was dedicated to examining the concept of consent and establishing the importance of it when you kind of incorporate an inversion of that, or basically simulated non-consent, consensual simulated non-consent. I honestly kind of feel like be helpful to include that in there, but it kind of becomes a mouthful in like not the fun way when you start getting really long with your kink names. But it is kind of nuanced because like what does enthusiastic mean if you've planned a kidnapping scene where you're playing pretend? How do you differentiate? Like when does it stop becoming enthusiastic? And that's why the kink framework has a bunch of protocols for making sure that what you're doing is consensual, like stopping and doing a check-in partway through, using a safe word, checking in as the dom to make sure that you haven't accidentally made your sub go nonverbal, and making sure they're not in like too deep into the mindset that we call subspace. And I know I'm like throwing a bunch of kink terms around because I'm a giant nerd, but that's how into consent I am, man. I went to a seminar
I love that. No, it leaves me. I was gonna ask you, I'm like, I want to pick your brain about kink lifestyle and the kink stuff. Um, because I haven't had really any guests in a long time who have, talked about, I don't want to call it the lifestyle, but the kink world. Uh
Yeah.
that is, and I'm gonna pull back the curtain for so many of the listeners in that I am somebody who talks about sex all day for the most part, and I'm very comfortable making posts about sex and videos about sex education. But then when people are like about your sex life, I'm like, oh, like I'm such a loser about it. And no, it's like, society has conditioned us like we don't talk about your own personal
Uh,
stuff, but we should talk to people that we trust with our personal details. There is no reason I can't talk to my girlfriends about like, yeah, this is what I really enjoy. What are y'all into? Like, and it's just normal, right? And I'm trying to work through that because like I have always wanted to go to like a King festival, but I feel like I am going to be so anxious for the unknown. And I've had a friend that's like, girl, I go all the time. Let's go together. I was like, oh my God, that would make me feel literally so much better to go with somebody.
That's literally a service I offer. Like, if a client was local and wanted to go out and explore this, like, it is an environment that you should have someone accompany you with too. I mean, ideally, you go to a munch first and don't just jump straight into a dungeon, but plenty of people jump straight into a dungeon. And if you're going to do that, you should have a friend who knows what they're doing to make you feel more comfortable.
Yes.
Safe.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm like, I'm comfortable in my sexuality. I'm comfortable with my body for the most part and stuff like that, but I'm just like so hesitant around it. So anything you want to talk about related to the world of kink? What a great title for this podcast. The World of Kink with
Oh
Lacey.
God. I feel so underqualified to have my name attached to that. Like, put Dossie Easton on that episode. Like, I can't. Dipping your toe into the pond, into the ocean. But
But
yeah. Yeah,
anything you want
I can kind of do some broad strokes and then get into some areas that I'm more knowledgeable about. But I had a quick question for you to understand your mindset, which was that like there's something about like going to the space or potentially having to discuss your personal interests or sex life that feels kind of anxiety inducing. Yeah. One of many things that people don't understand about kink or that is not widely understood is that it is actually not appropriate to just up and ask someone what they're into upon first meeting them. It's actually widely frowned upon, and I've gotten a guy kicked out of an event for doing that to me. Because consent is taken so seriously in at least the current iteration of kink community that I engage in, particularly in Los Angeles, because I'll go into a little bit about the history, because as it has gotten a bit more widestream, certain concepts have grown and developed and become more well articulated, I think, which is really awesome because it is niche. It's niche, it's under the radar. Plenty of people don't even know it exists. And plenty of people do and are like, that seems cool. How the fuck you get into that? But yeah, so asking someone about that type of thing is something that, like in real life, you have to earn the right to, because as much as we are not taboo about our sex and bodies and sex are still personal. And you don't just like jump into someone's personal shit like the first time you're meeting them unless you have both decided, okay, we're just gonna lay it all out there and like have this conversation. Like, is this a setting in which we can just say like, what are your kinks? Because you have to kind of set that conversation up. It's not just a free for all the time. There are a set of expectations and protocols and social rules that allow for a freer environment because it's all operating off of generally like a shared understanding. And I am describing a somewhat idealized like situation of like, this is the way it's supposed to be and this is where I've seen it done well. There's a variety of ways people practice kink, in whether it's just like as a couple in their own home, or they never go out to dungeons, or they exclusively play in dungeons. So kink, BDSM, lifestyle, fetish lifestyle, S&M, which falls under BDSM, but some older terminology will just refer to it as SM, or leather sex is an older term as well. The seminal books on BDSM are the Topping Book and the Bottom Book by Dossie Easton and Janet Harding, who also wrote The Ethical Slut. Those are both really amazing resources on like the practice of BDSM, but when it comes to community, like it looks a different way. But kink, BDSM, fetish, these are all terms that overlap a lot. The way I generally think about it is that kink is an umbrella under which fetish and BDSM and various types of play fall, because ultimately I see kink as kind of structured play that only includes as much sex as the people practicing it want to. The general impression of kink is like, ooh, kinky sex, kinky whatever, weird sex stuff. And yeah, there's a lot of sex in kink because we're adults and many adults enjoy having sex. There are also plenty of asexual, aspec, gray sexual, demi people who practice kink and BDSM, and it's not sexual for them at all. Or there's people who are allosexual who like to have sex but don't always want it in their kink or only want it with certain people. It really comes down to like bodily agency and autonomy on a lot of different granular levels. If you think about it a lot like a sex nerd, which I am. All right. So there's a lot of overlap between kink, BDSM, and fetish. I see kink kind of as an umbrella under which the others sit. BDSM has probably historically been one of the most widestream terms that people recognize. It's an acronym that stands for bondage, discipline, dominance and submission, and sadism and masochism. And so there's a bunch of different types of play under there. A lot of those revolve around role play, and I'm not just talking about like the sexy nurse costume. It's more about a power dynamic, power exchange role. The role being like that of the dominant partner or the submissive partner, and those can all take on a lot of different flavors. Dominance and submission are probably the most in the zeitgeist part of kink right now. Thank you, Book Talk. Thank you, Shadow Daddies, because there's just something about that role and that power exchange that people have found appealing for a long time, and it's gotten a lot of more fun attention recently. And it's really hard. It is hard. Like I'm kind of struggling because it's hard to nail down one definition of kink. But under those different things, the important element to remember is some of these terms are still used interchangeably, and you just kind of have to like discuss and check if you're on the same baseline about like the term you're discussing. Fetishes are usually when a certain object or body part has a very strong sexual connotation to it. Some people argue that there are non-sexual fetishes as well, where you just like very much like a thing and it's not necessarily sexual. It's a lot of gray area, and it's a lot of areas that like people just kind of like talk about and figure out, but it is also a generally small and good community where those types of discussions are very much encouraged and fun to have, which is why I went to several long ass seminars at a kink fest about it. It's a great event. It was so much fun. It was in Portland. It was like 3 days of like combination of seminars, open play in their giant 54,000 square foot dungeon, which like has them like a dungeon like 101, like orientation if you've never been to a dungeon before. Here's what's up. But the classes and education were like super good. I was very impressed and happy.
That's amazing. It's like, what did you do this weekend? Let me just tell you. I went to a seminar
About primal hunt play. It was put on by the same folks who did the consensual non-consent seminar, Tide Red and Alan from Denver, which now I want to visit Denver.
Have you never been?
No, I have been. I just want to go back now as a kinky adult and see what their scene is like.
All right, well, you're going to have to come back next week for part 2 of my amazing conversation with Lacey. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Meet Me at the Spot. I'm your host, Holly, and this week is part 2 of my conversation with Lacey. We are, of course, jumping in the middle of part of the conversation, so if you didn't listen to part 1 from last week, I highly recommend that you do that. Lacey breaks down a lot of concepts around kink community and around intimacy, coaches and therapists and things like that. So go back and check that out and then come back here for part 2. But let's jump into my conversation with Lacey. I think it's really important because when we talk about kink, a lot of people are like, oh, it looks like this. it's only this. And I'm not into 50 Shades of Grey, even though 50 Shades of Grey has
Good, you
so much wrong
shouldn't
with it.
be.
You
It's
should.
trash.
You should.
E.L. James, I'm sorry. I'm not
Listen,
sorry.
when it came out and I was married to my ex-husband, who was not great, it was sexually satisfying.
This is a thing that can also be true. Like, media is not perfect.
Oh.
Just know that it's entertainment.
Yeah.
Niche areas, you should just watch Secretary instead. But
Yeah,
no, like sexual content is fun. I love sex scenes on TV and film. I always have. I really love that intimacy coordination has been taking off in current like film productions, and it's an area that I actually want to train into. I'm in the right city, but I've been focusing more on coaching because when you transition careers, I find it's probably better for me to focus on one thing at a time. And also production is very slow. So all my film friends, I'm sorry.
yeah.
But like that has made it makes for better scenes. It makes for better experiences. It's not some interloper on set whose job it is to be the fun police. It's like, hey, we're gonna shoot a sexy scene. Let me talk to the director so that we can get on the same page about what the vision is. Let me talk to the actors, the performers, find out what kind of personal boundaries they have, how we want to shoot this scene, how we want to choreograph it, how to light it even. Like I would guess that the majority of good sex scenes coming out are because someone on set took the time to check in with how people were doing. And there are plenty of performers who are at a point in their career where they may have the power and assertiveness to advocate for themselves, but advocating for yourself is hard in general. And with a very strong power dynamic on set, the director is generally at the top of the hierarchy. And even if you're an A-list performer, that dynamic can present some challenges. And if you are newer to the industry or don't have a lot of experience doing intimate scenes, whether they are clothed, partially clothed, nude, what your contract has in it, like depending on what your contract has in it, like it can be present the power dynamic is even more pronounced and it presents an additional challenge. And essentially, to get nerdy and academic about it, an intimacy coordinator's job is mediation, communication, and health and safety. And they make better scenes. They look better, they feel better, and they're generally safer for the performers.
I love that. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that. I've seen an increase of conversation around intimacy coordinators for film. And I had a previous guest who is just amazing, and she is a smut consultant. So people who are writing smut, she kind of reviews it to make sure that it is, not that you're taking the sexiness out of it. You're like, he put the penis into the anus. Like, it's not making it sound like
It's
medical.
not erotic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Language around that stuff is highly personal and fairly niche. And
Mm.
yeah, I know I've heard of some other smut consultants as well, particularly for kink because it is becoming so much more prominent in romance novels. And I do find that it's probably because most romance writers are women. They are putting a lot of effort into being like, hey, like, is this stuff I'm writing bullshit, or would a scene go like this, or does a dungeon look like this? I've had people come to me with those questions. This is a great segue back into kink. Dungeons look a lot of different types of ways. Some of them are like very like clean, polished, like the Apple Store of dungeons, and have like a lot of like professional programming with classes and orientations and stuff. I really love that there are a lot of like safety orientations at a lot of dungeons because there is a wide spectrum of types of kinky play. And when I say types of kinky play, I mean anything under that umbrella, which is very broad, but I can kind of talk about some of the main types of play that people engage in or talk about. But some types of play carry more risk. And there are several consent frameworks within kink that have incorporated that. The OG safe, sane, consensual framework for BDSM and engaging in kinky play just is pretty self-explanatory. Is what you're doing safe? Is it sane? Is it consensual? There are more granular levels of like consent frameworks like RAC, which is risk aware consensual kink. It's kind of in the same vein of moving from safe sex language to safer sex. Safer kink is also a thing. Certain activities carry heavier risks. If you're going to be doing impact play, which is like spanking, flogging, riding crops, you can use all kinds of things to deliver impact to your partner. And knowing how the human body works, what areas can be spanked and where it shouldn't be. Pro tip, the butt gets spanked a lot for a reason. There's a lot of tissue there, there's a lot of fat. Versus if you get smacked like on the back of the kidney really hard, you could take lasting damage. So there's a level of risk awareness that goes into all types of play, and that becomes the need for that becomes more pronounced the more risky your play becomes. Like on the more quote extreme end, if we want to think about kink in terms of like light to extreme or soft to hard, like on the more extreme end, you will have people that do like blood play or needle play. And there are courses and classes on if you're going to do this thing that common sense says not to, here is how to engage in harm reduction and risk mitigation for the thing. Certain events, if they allow those things, require you to immediately do first aid on any abrasion or breaking of the skin, stuff like that. There are also, like, because this is a broad community, like I'm sure there are house parties where people are doing all kinds of stuff in the privacy of their own home, and this does come down to privacy that may not be advisable. And that's why we focus so much on consent and safety, because there are avenues in which it is still very much misunderstood, where anything that happens to you that you ultimately don't want might get blamed on you as a victim for like, well, you consented to being in a dom sub relationship. And it's like, yeah, that I didn't consent to like him getting drunk and assaulting me.
Right.
It's about what's negotiated in any agreement between you and your partner, whether it is for a single scene or for a 24/7 dynamic, or if you're dating and it's somewhere in between. So that kind of, I know it's kind of a bummer to think about, but it's also very important because sexual assault and domestic violence are already very poorly understood and treated by the systems we have in place in this country, and I suspect in others. So when you add an overlay of a complexity and nuance to consent that our society at large doesn't have, they get very confused, and that can end up hurting people. Transitioning back into kink in general. Any questions? I was going to talk about fun stuff. I just got on a tangent.
But you're okay. Don't worry.
We were talking
Yeah,
about dungeons looking differently.
Yeah, this is so good. So educational. Because a lot of people don't think about all of the kind of nuances that go into it, right?
Mhm.
And at the end of the day, it is all in an effort to keep yourself safe and to keep any partners that you engage with safe as well. Because, if someone's not safe, I'm going to imagine they probably aren't going to be having more fun sex
Probably not.
for a while or ever with you. So
Mm-hmm.
that part's
So
important.
exactly.
Legal and
So there's a couple of things, there's a couple of axes that I kind of organize the framework of kink and the community to practice around, but it's all predicated on that role play that I talk about. Generally, that falls under dominance and submission, which are nuanced terms that have a lot of misunderstandings around them that I'm going to explain. Doming and subbing and topping and bottoming. Usually those two things align, and the dom is both also the top being the person enacting whatever the activity is on their partner, who is the bottom, the receiver, the submissive. And the thing about a dom sub relationship is that it is negotiated. It is a power exchange that has to be executed from a foundation of equality, because it's not just about stronger, bigger, badder, more dominant partners finding weaker people to enact their will upon. It is about people finding elements in each other that complement one another and engaging in types of play that they're both into in a way that feels safe and satisfying and gratifying and pleasurable for them. So we have softer end, harder end. I feel like the softer side of kink is really needs more attention and understanding. I think there's a couple of reasons why it doesn't. It's not as titillating as whips and chains excite me, which I mean, me too, Riri, but like so does a praise kink. Call me a good girl. Like I had a room full of my fellow sexologists and coaches yelling good girl at me a couple of weeks ago. I was on a retreat with folks from my program, and we were doing a presentation-based exercise with like a vocal coach. It was really cool. I'm a theater kid. I loved it. And at one point I like stumbled with a direction and I was like, I'm trying really hard, you guys. Like I'm trying to do a good job and listen to this. And someone was like, you're a good girl. And they all started yelling good girl at me. And I was like, this is actually really helpful. Thank you. I can finish my exercise now. And that was a situation where like you're not really supposed to like call someone an honorific without like knowing them or negotiating them. These are all people that I knew was comfortable with. They knew that was a thing for me. And it was just like a very open, like we're all working from the same playbook here type of situation. But like on that softer end, you have things like praise kink, sensation play, sensual play is usually what it falls under. Kind of like I'm more of a sensual play rather than like a pain player. I'm not really into masochism. Like I have a low pain threshold and pain isn't what does it for me. One of the big things to understand about like why pain is such a thing in kink is that the pain and pleasure centers are next to each other in the brain, and it just generates a really interesting feedback loop in your body physiologically. Kink can also involve a lot of mental elements, like calling me a good girl because I have religious trauma and I just need to know that I'm doing okay and not going to hell. What?
I was thinking it in my head and I was like, I bet this is very much related to some religious trauma
It can
because
be.
because
Sometimes it do be that way. There's actually a therapist, Nicole, I forget her last name. She's at Nicole double L on Instagram, writing a book on exploring, as a therapist and a BDSM practitioner, the viability of BDSM as a therapeutic framework for treating trauma, which any traumatized kinkster will tell you absolutely yes. And so it's really exciting to have someone writing a book from that specific perspective because, particularly for purity culture and religious trauma survivors, the framework of kink provides a level of agency, autonomy, and control and sex positivity that we were very specifically denied in some specific ways. I have an article I wrote about purity culture, and a lot of my work revolves around this. But that whole focus on agency and autonomy. Who are you? What do you want? You have the power to get that. You deserve the agency to pursue what you want. Self-exploration and self-acceptance, actually, I feel are even more fundamental. And in one of the courses I'm building is like basically sexual empowerment, post-purity, specifically sexual empowerment that starts with like, okay, like the body is not bad. Pleasure and wanting it and sexual desire are not bad. The body is morally neutral. Sexual desire is a natural response that most humans feel, or natural need or desire that most humans feel. Part of sex positivity for me, by the way, is continuing to acknowledge that asexuality is a completely valid expression of human sexuality. You don't have to ever want sex in your life. You can go about your life never having that, and that's fine. Sometimes I feel like in sex positivity, people can get the impression that like you just want everybody to be fucking all the time. I'm like, no, I want everybody who wants to be fucking all the time to be having good sex that aligns with what they want and makes them feel good. And if what they want is nothing and having no sex is what feels good to them, I want them to be having that. There's definitely, I think, a lot of therapeutic potential in a lot of the practices, but only if you are approaching it from like their kind of aware mindset of yourself and those elements, which I got halfway through and gave up because I went on a tangent. I didn't give up, I just went on a tangent. Agency and autonomy, consent and communication, making sure that you are not violating someone else's personal bodily autonomy or agency, which is where consent is so important. Communicating, like learning who you are, what you want, communicating that to a partner. And that is what the kink framework does. The question, what kinks are you into, should come from a place of, do we want the same things? Might we want to provide those things for each other? Like stuff like that. And then negotiation, which builds on that. I mean, that's basically what I was just describing. You start the conversation. If you get to a point where you're like, we have similar interests and we vibe on a personal level, like, do you want to try playing? And that conversation can happen very quickly or very slowly. Like I've had that conversation at an event in a dungeon and did a vibe check, talked about consent, negotiated what we wanted the scene to include, and played like within a space of 5 or 10 minutes. And part of that is that self-exploration, is understanding not just your desires, but your limits. What you don't want is just as important as what you do want. And it's okay for you to not want something, even if it's something that the other person does or is good at or specializes in. You might want to connect with them on like a different level. If I know a rope top who also does impact, maybe I only want to do rope with them. Maybe I only want to do impact. If I'm not into one of those things and we still connected and there was something else that we could connect on, we can just connect on that thing. So negotiation is